Hello and welcome to my take on 1984, the story by George Orwell that he published in 1949 versus our world now in 2024. This was a goal that I had set prior to finding out about the banned book challenge. I'll be talking more about that in the video. So in the novel, Orwell had talked about things like home surveillance. He mentioned telescreens, the government monitoring everything that people do, the hate speeches he had to attend when he was at work, and his main character's job of rewriting history. Now in 2024, the world includes things like cell phones. People have CCTV as well as businesses and schools. There are social platforms. People put out all kinds of things, some good, some incorrect. Some use it to promote hate and are attempting to rewrite history as well. I first read the novel in 1983. I was only 19 years old and it totally freaked me out. Even though back then things like what I'm doing now was way in the future, and seeing people talking to each other on a computer screen or TV or telephone was the stuff of the Jetsons world. I read the novel again in 2024, which I planned because it was 40 years ago, and I decided to see what the difference was. After that goal, I came across the banned book challenge because I'd set the goal of reading 1984 in 2023, and this is my copy. It's a double collection. I have Animal Farm and 1984. I've reread both of them. So when I found out about the banned book challenge, I decided not only had I picked the right year to reread 1984 because I was curious about 40 years later, but it's also one of the banned books, which made it a double bonus to read. Was Orwell right? In his novel, the main character, William, works at what's called the Ministry of Truth, and his job is to rewrite the news, articles, to make sure that it coincides with what the government wants people to believe. William also has flashes of the world before. He has memories of being a child and things being different, but he can't clearly recall them. If you've read The Handmaid's Tale, there's a similarity there, as in of Fred, the main character in The Handmaid's Tale, clearly remembers what the world was like before the events in that story unfold because it's just a few years ago. In the case of William, it's quite a bit of time that has passed. So William decides to start journaling to see if he can piece together and remember more of what things were like beforehand. And of course, he knows what the government is saying isn't true because it's his job to correct things. But he knows that he has to be careful because there are cameras and microphones everywhere, not just in his own apartment, but everywhere on the street, at work. So he needs to do this very carefully so that he isn't caught. Citizens, as I said, are expected to believe what the government, their main person, Big Brother, tells them to believe. In the novel, we also find out that the dictionary is being changed, continually revised to eliminate words that lead citizens to have thoughts deemed inappropriate. So by eliminating certain words and changing the language, they can ensure that people aren't thinking about things that may lead them to realize that the world isn't the way the government is telling them that it is. In this world, the work days are long. Even with jobs, people live in poverty. We know from William's apartment, there are all kinds of issues with the buildings, the heating. They tend to eat at work because they don't have a lot of money to buy their own food. There's control. They're supposed to be at certain activities. Being on your own is discouraged. They don't want people away from the main group, and that's all a form of mind control. We also learn about youth groups and the children when he talks to one of his neighbors, and she seems very concerned. She has 2 young children. Their father talks about how proud he is that they've reported people for having inappropriate thoughts, doing inappropriate actions. And of course, we've seen that type of behavior in history as well as other stories. Intimate relationships, of course, are also discouraged, as are family bonds, because again, it's that divide and conquer mentality. If you have close friendships or you have close families, it's much more difficult to control that group of people. So in this world, if you are close to someone, as William does fall in love with another character, and as the story progresses, we see that when you're close to someone, that's used against you, especially if you are taken in to what's called the Ministry of Love, where they use torture and various other devices and strategies to make you conform to what they want you to believe. Now, William, prior to being caught, believes there is a resistance, that there are others like him who remember the time before. What we also notice throughout the story is there aren't many people over 50 years old. You have the proles that don't work in the ministries. They pretty much seem to be left on their own. They're also monitored, of course, as is everybody. But in the ministry and the folks higher up, there really aren't any people older than 50. That in itself should be a red flag that something has occurred to eliminate people who would remember the time before and who may not buy into this narrative of we're at war with this country, not that one, and constantly changing the narrative, as well as, oh, look at everything we're producing, and yet somehow all these people are living in poverty. Unfortunately for William, he believes that O'Brien is someone that he can trust, that he could potentially be in the resistance. And as William finds out, that was a bad choice. And William ends up being taken into the Ministry of Love, where O'Brien tells him they've been watching him for years. And we see just how far the government is willing to go to get people to believe their narrative. The 4 ministries in the novel and the names are the opposite of actually what they do. We have the Ministry of Truth, where our main character works. His job is to rewrite history so it fits the current narrative. So in the novel, we have 3 areas that are constantly at war, and the ally changes. So Oceania, where William lives, is at war at one time with one other sector. That will change in a few years. And then the new narrative becomes, oh no, these people have always been our allies. We've always been at war with this other sector. And so, of course, any news articles, magazine articles, etc., all have to be changed to reflect that. Personally, I think that's rather ambitious because you think of all the different places where things would come up about the war, production, relationships, but that's the premise in this novel. At the Ministry of Love, ironically, is where the torture and some very disturbing things happen to try and get people to get on side with what the government wants people to believe. And of course, if that doesn't happen, you just tend to disappear. The Ministry of Peace is, oddly enough, the War Department. So they're always involved in what the latest events are and military planning strategy. We then have the Ministry of Plenty, which again is ironic when you look at how little the citizens, working or not, actually have. Their clothing is determined. The color of their clothing is determined by the job they have, the ministry they work in. So they don't even have a choice of what they want to wear on a particular day. That's all decided for them. According to the Ministry of Plenty, they're always successful. Things are, you know, moving along. Sometimes they'll say that the amounts aren't that good, so we need to all cut back and make improvements. But of course, as we're reading the novel, we know that pretty much everything that the government is telling them is a lie. William, at one point, actually, it may be just implied that it may even be the government that's bombing some of their own areas. It's a very different world for sure. So 2024, and these are just my opinions. Other people may disagree or have seen other things. But for me, this is how it compares to the Orwell novel. We don't have the telescreens that were in the novel that were always just telling people what was going on with the war and production and broadcasting constantly. But in our world, we have CCTV, and in this case, no, the government didn't have to put it into homes or anywhere else. People have voluntarily put it into their own homes. I find it interesting because, I mean, people have it throughout their homes, they have doorbells. And sadly, some of the things I've seen is where they get hacked, meaning other people have access to your cameras and what's going on in your home. It's a really creepy concept. I mean, in schools, I worked in high schools, we had the video cameras, of course, everywhere. When you go in stores now, you can wave at yourself as you're walking in the doorway because they have video cameras everywhere. I've noticed watching different videos, our streets have CCTV everywhere. And for people who have CCTV outdoors, it's not just their property, it shows the whole area around them, so homes across the street as well. So even if you don't have CCTV, there's chances that your home may have shown up somewhere on social media at some point. It really is a bizarre concept. People carry cell phones, and rarely do they stop and think that those are location devices that they're walking around with. They can be accessed. People can follow you around. For people who have Apple phones, not only will it tell you the location, but you can even find out when someone arrived and left a location. I find that immensely disturbing particularly for people who may live in a dangerous home situation. That just makes it so much scarier for them because the other person can just grab their phone or probably find information some other way on where they've been and when they've arrived and left. To me, that's just creepy. In the novel, there are mandatory hate speeches that employees have to attend, and it just keeps people constantly on edge. Now, people are on social media. They find others who share their views, opinions, and that just cycles around. So it isn't timed like it is in the novel, but there are certainly people out there who are using the platforms to spread misinformation, to spread hate against other people, to encourage self-segregation. In other words, if you don't look like me or you don't talk like me, then you don't get to be part of this group. It's a very disturbing, different world. Now, on the other hand, there are also people, thankfully, who are using the platform to encourage. We all have similarities, whether we look the same, sound the same. So there's both sides, thankfully, and it just depends on what side you're interested in listening to or be a part of, where you're going to go and get your information. In the novel, we hear about newspeak, as in changing the language, the meaning of words. In the world now, we've got people who pretty much speak in short forms or just use letters instead of actually using the words. So it's a bit concerning. I mean, there are still some words, as I mentioned with the social platform. Sometimes people forget the power that their words have. And, I'll look at different videos and it's another, oh, I made a mistake. Oh, I shouldn't have said that. And my thought is, had you considered all of that before you uploaded, you wouldn't continually be making those same apology videos. On the other hand, also, if you're considering what is the message that you're trying to send, then you're more careful about your words and what you're saying. But it definitely is an interesting issue, and watching some of this play out in 2024, I just finished reading How Woke Won by Joanna Williams, and even with that whole issue of how people choose to refer to themselves, words like woman or boys and girls, saying they're boys and girls is a big brouhaha, an issue with some people. So it's really hard to say how all of that is going to play out over time. The media, of course, it depends on the channel you watch. If you just watch, again, channels that you believe are telling you the truth, you don't look at other sides of things. They tell the population what to focus on. And while all this other stuff is going on in the media, of course, governments are passing bills that people are not even aware of. There's a number of examples. And if you're interested in learning about that, then I suggest going to your government websites, whether they're local or for the whole country, and find out what's really going on, because I don't watch the news. I see the odd clip now and again on YouTube, but I do know that since it's just one or three people typically portrayed in the news and all the various things going on with them, or what's the latest stupid that they've said or done, there are so many other things going on in the world they're not reporting on. Like the number of people who currently live as slaves, the number of issues that are still occurring in terms of human trafficking. So it's very disturbing to see that we have a massive group of people laser focused on the past, but blissfully either ignorant, unaware, or uninterested in what is happening in the here and now today. So to me, that's a big issue. It's one I've been looking more into because here in my area, they're looking at renaming 12 schools. It isn't just the issue of the tens of thousands of dollars that will go into that per building. In other words, money that will not be going to support resources or your child's education. But along with eliminating that name from the building, they're trying to eliminate what that individual did in history, whether that was exploration or discoveries. And it's very disturbing to know that our school boards also are blissfully unaware of the events currently going on. I leave that to people to look into it for themselves. But there are so many things going on in the here and now, but most of it is being swept under the carpet because people are laser focused behind them instead of in the now and in the future. Other works that I found connected with 1984 as I was reading it is, of course, The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood. We read another society where things are all set out. People are separated by their clothing, by their role in these communities, much like in 1984, where, again, their clothes are designated by the job they do. There are elements of the Hunger Games here, although it isn't about youth so much in 1984, it's adults. But again, it's this group of people, as in the Hunger Games, who are above all the others and basically forcing them to live in certain conditions, keep them separated. Now, in the Hunger Games, you have families and connections, which you don't in 1984. But again, it's that issue of a massive group of people deciding what happens to the others. Divergent is the same. It's another series about young adults, a community. And again, we have that one group of people and Divergent outside of their area and determining what will go on and how things play out and observing them while all this is going on. That occurs also in the Hunger Games, where we have all this different type of surveillance and things going on. The TV series as well as the movie V also has different elements that tie in with 1984. In the case of V, we have these reptilian creatures that appear as human. But in V, we also have that youth group who report on neighbors and others, and we see what happens when the one character ends up reporting on his family, and suddenly his family members are disappearing. And of course, we've seen that type of behavior with the youth groups play out in history during the Holocaust. Chrysalids also tied into this again, another culture that we've had an event happen in Chrysalids, and I need to reread it. We don't quite know what brought this society about, but it's very structured. There's only one small part of the population who seems to remember what happened in the time before. And again, here we see people are meant to think one way, believe things a certain way, and if you don't, then you end up being sent out to work in these horrific conditions and live in these horrific conditions and make the best of what you have. So there's a lot of tie-ins and different themes that come up in 1984 that some of the more not popular, some of the more current or newer authors have tied in with as well. What are your thoughts about 1984, the world in 2024? Do you think Orwell was giving us an idea about how humanity is eventually going to go? He was just off by several years. Do you think there's something larger happening in the world? Do you see how we can come together and realize that we're all humans? We have more in common than we have different, and that the sooner that groups are able to connect and form those bonds and keep those bonds, the sooner that some of this other hate and misinformation will start to gain less traction, and we can return to moving forward as we were always meant to. As always, thank you so much for the gift of your time. It's always appreciated. Let me know what you thought. Did I hit some things that were connected to 1984? It was definitely fascinating to see the comparisons 40 years later for myself. Like I say, it was just my opinion. If you enjoyed this video, found it of benefit, thought-provoking, be sure to give that like button a little tickle. If you enjoy content of a bookish nature, silly cat videos, or nature clips, be sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you know when I upload content that may be of interest to you. And until next time, be sure to take good care.